I'm writing a sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods. In this talk I'm going to review some of the evidence that I covered in Fingerprints of the Gods, and I'm also going to share some of the new material, including Göbekli Tepe, that has made me feel the time is right to produce a sequel to Fingerprints of the Gods, because that controversial case of a lost civilization that was so widely scorned and dismissed in 1995 is much stronger in 2015, which is when the book will be published. And we'll begin on the Giza Plateau, and with, of course, the last surviving wonder of the ancient world, the Great Pyramid, which I know many in this room have visited and been stunned by. And those are the statistics: 13.1 acre footprint, 6 million tons in weight, 2.3 million individual blocks of stone. It's thought that the lost casing stone, which came off in an earthquake in 1301, consisted of 115,000 shaped blocks weighing 10 tons each. They are now part of the architecture of Cairo, having been used as a quarry for the building of mosques and palaces all over Cairo. And that they covered an area of 22 acres, and the angle of slope is 52 degrees. And should you wish to climb the Great Pyramid illegally, this is the corner I recommend, which is the southwest corner. Bear that in mind. Egypt is a country where things can be done with money, and it is still possible to climb the Great Pyramid at night, and sometimes at other times just part with a few Egyptian pounds and take your life in your hands. 52 degrees, follow that corner, try to go up any other side, you're going to get lost. This corner, I've also been up the southeast corner, but it is a much more difficult climb than the southwest corner. Santa and I have climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times altogether. The pyramids tower over modern Cairo, and you have this epic sense of a remote and mysterious past which hangs over that cluttered, noisy city. And Santa took this photograph from an Egyptian military helicopter hovering over the village of Nazlet al-Saman at the foot of the Giza Plateau. And we are right now northeast of the Great Pyramid complex. And it's a sign of how enormous these pyramids are that the Great Sphinx is actually quite difficult to see in the picture. The Great Sphinx being 70 feet high and 270 feet long, and there is Sphinxy sitting there gazing across the Nile Valley. Let's swing round now to the western side, and we're looking at the north faces of the 3 Great Pyramids here. We can see why Egypt is referred to as the gift of the Nile, since this is the Nile Valley, full of fertility and life, while off to the west is the sere and inhospitable Western Desert. There would be no life in Egypt were it not for the amazing fertility and gift of the Nile Valley. And again, here is the Sphinx gazing east across the Nile Valley. Come closer now, and forgive me if some of you have seen parts of this before on YouTube, but this is a story I really like to tell. Here is the north faces of the 3 Great Pyramids, where the true entrances of all of them are found. This is Mamun's Hole, which was the Arabs breaking into the Great Pyramid in the 9th century. At that time, the true entrance up here was hidden by the facing stones and was lost. And that's the entrance that we all go in today, through Mamun's Hole. Closer and closer again, and you can see that there is half a course of masonry left on the south side at the top of the Great Pyramid. We don't know if the Great Pyramid was ever completed, as the second pyramid certainly was, but you can see the work of the facing stones left at the top part of the second pyramid. And you must envisage the Great Pyramid as at one time being entirely covered in highly polished limestone facing stones like this. And finally, we get to the very top, and there I am, a much younger man before my hip was replaced. But I still think I could leap up there like a mountain goat, thanks to the wonders of modern surgery. This was one of our illegal climbs. We did actually a couple of legal ones where you have to sign your life away at the bottom and tell the Egyptian police that if you have a fatal accident, you and your descendants will not hold the Egyptian government responsible. And you can see that there's a lot of graffiti cut into the blocks on the top of the Great Pyramid. Some famous names are there, including Gerard Mercator, the map maker who's responsible for the Mercator projection, who climbed the Great Pyramid in the 1500s. Just one step below me here, I found a very familiar name, which was the name P. Hancock, with the date 5th of April 1916. And this is the story I love to tell. Forgive me if you've heard it before, but my grandfather was called Philip Hancock, and he was a chaplain with British forces in the First World War in Egypt. So I had to think that that might have been my grandfather who left his graffiti there. But I could check it because my father had my grandfather's diaries, which were inscribed on tiny little diary books, dozens of them actually. And I called him up after we came down, and I asked him to fish out Grandpa's diaries, which I knew he kept in the drawer in his desk in his study, and to search for the date 5th of April 1916. And I heard him rustling through the pages, and finally he came back on the line and he said, "Yeah, I found it, but there's just one line here." I said, "What does that line say, Dad?" He said, "Climbed Great Pyramid today." So I do feel a connection. So sadly, my father passed away in 2003. Santa and I took him to the Great Pyramid in 1999, but he was already in quite an advanced state of cancer at that time and was unable to climb the pyramid, although I know he would have loved to do so. So the Great Pyramid stands on latitude 30 degrees north. This is not a random latitude, of course. It's 1/3 of the way between the equator and the North Pole. According to Egyptologists, it is a random latitude. Everything about the Great Pyramid is random because it was created by semi-savages who were incapable of thinking logically about anything. So it's an accident that it's situated on latitude 30 degrees north. It's also a kind of accident as well that it's just almost perfectly aligned to true north, within 3/60ths of a single degree. This is one of the reasons why I don't feel I need aliens to explain the Great Pyramid. Because aliens who had the technology to cross interstellar space would have the technology to align this monument perfectly to true north. It's almost perfect. It's incredibly good workmanship. As human workmanship go, it's uncannily good. But I don't think it's interstellar space technology. Likewise, the side lengths of the Great Pyramid vary by as much as 7 inches. That across 750 feet isn't much either. But again, if you were interstellar traveling aliens and you built this, I think you would get it spot on. I think it bears all the hallmarks of human workmanship of a very advanced level, much more advanced than history gives credit for in the epoch of 2500 BC. So it's just 3/60ths of a degree off true north across that whole 13-acre footprint. And it really takes astronomy to align the monument that precisely. It tells us that the builders were astronomers. This I went into in Fingerprints of the Gods. I think it's highly significant that that the dimensions of the Earth are built in to the dimensions of the Great Pyramid on a scale of 1 to 43,200. Again, Egyptologists are aware of this, and again, in their way, they say that it's a total coincidence and it has no meaning whatsoever. But if you take the height of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. And if you measure accurately the base perimeter of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same number, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. And it's interesting that Isaac Newton in the 1600s had an intuition, or perhaps it was based on his studies of ancient texts, that the dimensions of the Earth were coded in the Great Pyramid. And he sent John Greaves from Oxford to measure the Great Pyramid at that time on the assumption that they could scale up the Great Pyramid and get the dimensions of the Earth. John Greaves was not able to do an accurate measurement because the pyramid was covered to a great height in sand at that point. But it's interesting that Isaac Newton had that idea. Certainly in 2500 BC, when this monument is supposed to have been built, it is held by mainstream academics that nobody had knowledge of the dimensions of the Earth. indeed did not even know that we lived on a planet. But there you go, in all the centuries of darkness, when we did not know the dimensions of the Earth, and indeed didn't know that we lived on a planet, if you really, all you had to do was measure the Great Pyramid, scale it up by 43,200, and you would get precisely a printout of the dimensions of our planet. It's one of the ways, along with that orientation to true north, that the Great Pyramid speaks to the planet on which it is placed. I don't think it's coincidental at all, because this is not at all a random number. This is a highly significant number, and it belongs to a sequence of numbers that themselves relate to a key motion of the Earth, and that motion is the precession of the equinoxes. And again, I went into this at great length in Fingerprints of the Gods, and indeed had to teach myself astronomy and mathematics in order to write Fingerprints of the Gods, because that's one of the things the Great Pyramid does. If you really get into studying it, it starts initiating you into learning stuff that you don't know before. It is an initiatory device. At any rate, the precession is thought to be caused by a wobble on the axis of the Earth, caused by the competing gravities of the Sun and the Moon. My friend Walter Cruttenden, who runs the Binary Research Institute, has a different explanation. He thinks that it's because our solar system is in orbit around the star Sirius, and that the great circle in the heavens that our sun makes as it travels around the star Sirius would produce the same observable as the wobble on the axis of the Earth that is hypothesized by geographers today. But let's just go with the wobble theory for the moment. And what it is, it's rather like a spinning top, which when it's slowing down begins to do this. And what it means is it's most observable at the pole star. Today our pole star is Polaris. That's the star that the north pole of the Earth points almost perfectly at, not quite. But there have been other times in history, over a great cycle of 25,920 years, when the pole star has been another star, or indeed when the pole has pointed at a blank area of empty space. It's observable there, and it's observable on the horizon, particularly at the equinoxes, also at the solstices, at any time of year actually, but on those key moments of year. The background stars that rise behind the sun on those key moments of the year shift very gradually in, again, this great cycle that takes 25,920 years to complete, and that was referred to as the Great Year by the ancients. And that cycle operates at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And if you take 360 and multiply that by 72, you get 25,920, which is the entire cycle of the Great Year, when the clock resets and starts again from the place it was 25,920 years before. And that ratio, 43,200, is based on the number 72. It's exactly 600 times the number 72. So I would say if the ratio was 1 to 57,815, it would be less impressive than it is at 1 to 43,200, because that is a significant ratio relating to a key motion of the Earth itself. And furthermore, it belongs to a series of numbers that are found in ancient mythology all around the world. 72 is the heartbeat of the cycle, but you find these numbers related to 72. 72 divided by 2 is 36, 72 plus 36 is 108, half of 108 is 54, 108 times 2 is 216, 72 times 30 degrees in each house of the zodiac is 2,160, and so on and so forth, 4,320, 43,200. You can add zeros, but basically what you're doing is you're building a whole sequence of numbers based on the precessional cycle. These numbers are found all over the famous Mayan calendar. They're a central feature of the number system of the Mayan calendar. They are found in ancient mythology all around the world. It was proposed by Giorgio de Santillana and Hertha von Deschend. Giorgio de Santillana was the professor of the history of science at MIT. I highly recommend his book, Hamlet's Mill. It's a mind-bending book. It requires incredible dedication to read and to study it. I think that just as he was speaking of an ancient code, he also encoded his key message in that book in very abstruse language because he realized that he was sitting on academic dynamite. And what he was saying was and he does say it actually in plain words at one point in the footnote in the text, that his explanation for this is that the precession was completely observed and understood by some almost unbelievable ancestor civilization of remote antiquity. That's what he says. And that they chose, that for some reason it was so important to them that they chose to encode it in myth and in architecture, and that their belief was that if they encoded it in good enough mythological stories, the storyteller did not need to know the essence of the information he or she was transmitting. All they needed to do was tell the story true, and the information would be carried down the generations in this way, and thus preserved for the future, for a time when, again, people might understand the precession of the equinox. At Giza, as well as the precessional element in the Great Pyramid, the Great Sphinx is part of an overall precessional design. And the Great Sphinx, between whose paws stands a stela dating to the reign of Thutmose IV, the so-called dream stela, because Thutmose fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx and had a dream that he was to clear and renovate the Sphinx, which at that time was covered up to its shoulders in sand. And after he'd done that and done an extensive renovation, he put up this stela there, which recorded his great contribution to the Sphinx. On that stela in line 13, until about 60 years ago, there was a half of a syllable, there was a single syllable kaf, which was not surrounded by a royal cartouche. But believe it or not, that single syllable kaf that appeared on a stela that was put there a very long time after the Sphinx was created, that Moses reigned about 1400 BC, on the basis of that single syllable kaf, Egyptologists have given the Sphinx to Khafre, the pharaoh. They're saying that Thutmose was telling us that Khafre built the Sphinx, although the rest of the line is missing. That's their conclusion, because that fits their picture of history. It could easily have not been referring to Khafre at all, since there was no cartouche around it. And it might have been saying that Khafre was an earlier restorer of the Sphinx, and that Thutmose had simply come along and restored it later. Something else of greater interest on this stela is that it tells us the Sphinx marks the splendid place of the first time. The first time is an important concept in ancient Egyptian ideas. It's called Zep Tepi, and it is the time when the gods walked the earth, and it is set in a remote epoch deep in the past. The Sphinx is connected to that epoch, according to Thutmose. Now, if you get up on the Sphinx's back illegally, then this is what you'll see. That's the back of the Sphinx's head, and if you're there at the summer solstice, you're going to see the sun rising way over here, very far to the north of east. And if you're there at the winter solstice, you're going to see the sun rising way over here, very far to the south of east. But should you get up there on the spring equinox, the 21st of March, or indeed the autumn equinox, the 21st of September, when the sun rises perfectly due east, this is what you'll see. You will see the sun rising directly in alignment with the gaze of the Sphinx. And this is what the Sphinx is there to do. The Sphinx is an equinoctial marker. It is there to marry heaven and earth, and it will always gaze at the rising sun at dawn on the spring equinox. And what will change is the background stars behind the sun, that lie on the horizon where the sun will rise. If you go there an hour before dawn in our epoch, you'll find that we're near the end of the constellation of Pisces. And we've been in the constellation of Pisces, the age of the fish, for the last 2,000 plus years. And therefore it's not an accident that the ancient Christians used the fish as their symbol. Before the age of Pisces, it was the age of Aries. This was the time when ancient Egyptian symbolism was predominantly rams, the ram avenues of Karnak, for example. Before that, it's the age of Taurus, the bull. We have the Apis bull ceremony in ancient Egypt. The symbolism of bulls is key in the previous precessional epoch. And in our time, we're just on the cusp of Aquarius, of Pisces and Aquarius. And that's what it means by the song, "We live in the dawning of the age of Aquarius." We do indeed. We're not quite there yet, as we all know, but we're on the cusp. We're in one of those cusp moments in human history as the zodiac tells our story. And it certainly feels like a cusp moment today. So the precession operates in the opposite direction through the zodiac to our annual passage through the zodiac. Instead of going Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, it goes the opposite way. Leo, Cancer, Gemini, Taurus, Aries, Pisces, Aquarius. And it does so at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And the total of the great year is 25,920 years. And as my good friend and oft-time co-author Robert Boval has, I think Robert's contribution to Egyptology is enormous. And I think in future generations he'll be recognised as a genius who really cracked the essential code of the pyramid. I personally am in no doubt, I know Andy disagrees, but I'm personally in no doubt that Robert is correct about his Orion correlation theory. The constellation of Orion was seen as the celestial image of the god Osiris, who presides over life and death, the king of the netherworld. And it's highly appropriate that his image should be placed upon the ground in this extraordinary site, the Giza Plateau. And Robert and I working together on Key Proof Genesis in 1996, precessing the skies using astronomical software, which is something that you can do very easily. In ancient times, you had to have an incredibly gifted mind to envisage the changes in the skies, and really good math. But now with computer software, anybody can do it. And there's just this really interesting thing that happens at dawn on the spring equinox in 10,500 BC. Actually, it's pretty good between 10,000 and 11,000 BC. Precessional changes operate very slowly. And that is that just at the moment that the sun breaks the horizon, with the constellation of Leo the Lion housing the sun at that time, at just exact moment, at that exact moment, like the two arms of a clock, the constellation of Orion is crossing the meridian due south. The meridian is the north-south line that divides the sky above your head. Constellation is crossing the meridian due south just as the sun strikes the horizon. And therefore we don't think it's an accident, and we don't think it can be explained away in any other way, that at this time you have a lion-bodied monument gazing at its own image in the sky, and you have the three pyramids on the ground in a very close resemblance to the pattern of the three stars of the belt of Orion, as you would intuitively draw them if you looked at the sky and made a drawing of the three pyramids of the ground and then laid that drawing flat on the ground in front of you. We don't think that this is an accident at all. We think it speaks very strongly of the correctness of the Orion correlation and of the role of Leo, and the whole thing appears to be an attempt to bring down heaven to earth, as above, so below. Not in the epoch of 2,500 BC. You'd have to be astronomically illiterate to build an equinoctial marker in the form of a lion in 2,500 BC. If you were going to build that equinoctial marker in 2,500 BC, you'd have to build it in the form of a bull, because that's the age of Taurus. It's absurd to suggest that they would have made a lion equinoctial marker at that time. But that's what we have. And since Osiris was said to have ruled in Zep Tepe the first time, we shouldn't be surprised that the astronomical layout of the site hints at extremely ancient origins. I think that they're using precessional astronomy to draw attention to the epoch between 10,000 BC and 11,000 BC, between 12,000 and 13,000 years ago. Of course, I'm not saying that whoever created this amazing thing actually put the River Nile there to mirror the Milky Way, but I am suggesting that the site was chosen, that one of the reasons the site was chosen was because of that sky-ground correlation that occurs geographically at that time. Now, in my book Heaven's Mirror, I looked at the relationship of a number of sites around the world which are divided by significant degrees of longitude in precessional terms. Again, that number 72 is key. You don't notice it today with the prime meridian drawn through Greenwich for historical reasons. You have to actually do the calculations, but when you do the calculations, you find that Giza is separated from Angkor in Cambodia by exactly 72 degrees of longitude. It'd be much easier to notice if you set your prime meridian at 0. Then suddenly all these sites slot into place around the world, separated by significant degrees of longitude in terms of that scale which we've shown is so important at many, many sites. And let's just jump over to Angkor now, which has 72 major temples, and where we find Angkor Wat with a distinct pyramidal structure of its own. Scholars would say it's a coincidence, but Angkor actually means, in ancient Egyptian, life to the Horus. Now, I do not dispute that the temples of Angkor which I first visited with Santhe in 1997 and have visited multiple times since then, I don't dispute that the temples of Angkor were built in their present incarnation in the 1100s AD. That's a no-brainer. They definitely were. They date from the 1100s AD. But I think they're simply the latest incarnations of much earlier temples that were built on that site. I think that it's been a sacred site for thousands and thousands of years. Recent archaeology is beginning to demonstrate that there is a much older sublayer at Angkor. We're on the east side here looking west. See how that causeway runs through the center of Angkor on the east-west axis, and it's perfectly oriented east, west, and north-south. Causeway disappears across the moat and then vanishes over the horizon about 8 or 10 miles away. Again, this shot Santa took from a military helicopter. Interesting thing happens if you stand smack in the middle of that causeway, roughly there at dawn on the spring equinox, the same time that the Sphinx marks, the same time of year that the Sphinx marks. If you stand there at dawn and look east at the rising sun, you see it peep up over the central tower, roll up the side of the tower, and finally sit perfectly squarely on top of the central tower at dawn on the spring equinox. And of course, that's when you understand whatever else Angkor is meant to do, it's definitely meant to speak to this moment. It's marrying heaven and earth. It's an equinoctial marker, just as the Sphinx is. And I got into a lot of trouble for pointing out that the principal temples of Angkor are laid out in the pattern of a constellation, which is the constellation of Draco. This again is supposed to be a complete coincidence, or indeed a figment of my imagination and my researcher's imagination, because it was John Grigsby who first spotted that. Actually, I don't think it is a figment of the imagination. The relationship between the constellation of Draco and the key temples of Angkor is very strong, and it even extends to the temples down near Roloas, and it extends to the western Mebon, where we do see Cygnus coming into the picture, it involves a number of peripheral stars as well as the key stars of Draco. And what's really fascinating about it is that the correlation only works perfectly on the spring equinox between 10,000 and 11,000 BC, the exact same date that Giza prints out. So I have the sense that an enormous effort is being made to use stars and architecture to draw attention to a particular time that in our calendar we call between 10,000 and 11,000 BC. And interestingly, the same thing is done at the Hoover Dam. The Hoover Dam, this shows that our culture is doing things that the ancients were also doing. The Hoover Dam has a huge work of sculpture built into it. And Oscar Hansen, who was responsible for the star map set in the floor of the monument, believed that in remote ages to come, intelligent people with knowledge of precession would be able to discern the astronomical time of the dam's dedication, because he froze the stars above the dam at the moment of the dam's dedication. Now, in a sense, I mean, who gives a damn, when the Hoover Dam was? But what this tells us is that the idea of using a universal language of astronomy and architecture to speak to certain dates is perhaps not so strange as it might seem at first, because we ourselves do it. After all, you cannot predict in 10 or 12,000 years' time that the language you speak will be understood by anybody. We're only 5,000 years away from the Indus Valley civilization, and we can't translate their language today. It's a completely unknown text to us. 12,000 years, who knows whether English or whatever language was spoken 12,000 years ago would ever be spoken or ever be understood. Or even if it was, if any inscriptions would survive that length of time. But if you create gigantic monuments, or if you create a tradition that will keep rebuilding monuments on the same site, and if you lock in the stars, then you actually have an incredibly effective way of specifying a particular time frame and drawing attention to that time frame. And then the question becomes, why is that time frame so important that it deserves this kind of effort?